I would like to introduce you all to the very, very talented Poornima Nayar. Poornima has over 10 years of experience in .NET and Umbraco. She's an Umbraco MVP and also an honorary member of the core collaborators team. There's no better person to walk you through the ins and outs of grid-based editors in Umbraco 8. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Poornima Nayar.
Hello. Can I share my screen now?
Absolutely.
So that's screen 3. Share. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Just take
Can you see my screen?
You're good.
Yeah. And can you see the code window on the screen? Cool. Okay, I am going to start. In that case, are we on time? Cool. Hello and welcome. I'm Poornima Nayar, and thank you, Kyle, for the warm welcome. I'm a freelance .NET developer, and I'm speaking to you from Berkshire in UK. I'm a Microsoft MVP for the developer technologies, and I've been an Umbraco MVP for the last 2 years. And non-work me, I spend a lot of time with my little girl who is 6 years old. I spend a lot of time reading, mainly fiction. And I'm also learning Carnatic music, and I've been a student for the past 3 years. So you might find me blogging about it as well. And that's my Twitter handle, should you wish to connect with me on Twitter. I'll take any questions at the last. So apologies if I am not having a very interactive session today. And straight into the topic, when I think of having grid editors in Umbraco, the first thing that comes to my mind is we are spoiled for choice. I'm a mummy. I don't like being spoiled, but in this case, I'm totally happy to be spoiled for choice. And we have three options from the HQ that is in the core, which is grid layout, nested content, and block list editor. And thanks to some of the wonderful community members and package developers, we have 4 more community options, which is Doctype grid editor from Soren, containment content blocks by Lee, the 10-time Umbraco MVP, I should mention that, Perplex content blocks from Perplex Digital, that's Jeffrey's team over in Netherlands, and we have Bento Editor all the way from Australia, Coben Digital, and that's the team from Coben Digital, and the main person, I guess, behind is Peter Gregory. Today's plan is to go through the configuration for each of these grid editors. We'll have a quick sneak peek at the back office, how the editorial interface looks like, and we'll finally do a comparison of the features that are available. I'm not going to go into the web rendering of each of these grid editors. It's all available in my Git repo for you. And I've collated all the materials that I could find into a single URL for you, which is like a blog series that I've put together, and that's the short URL for it. It's on bit.ly umbraco-block-editors. So even before we start, the first thing I want to say is that except for the grid layout, if you go back a slide, except for the grid layout, all the other options are element type based. So the starting point is the element type. And thereafter, every other option here that you see on the screen starts by configuring of a data type. So we'll have a look at the data type, and that data type needs to go into a document type, and that document type can be then used by your content editors for editing. So without much delay, let's have a look at grid layout. So that's a back office setup I have for you today. So let's have a look at the grid layout data type configuration to begin with. There we go. So the data type is based on a property editor called grid layout, and it's a layout builder, as the name suggests. So you can have layouts for your pages, and then you have your rows within the layout, and inside the rows you have cells, and inside the cells goes your content using what is called as a grid editor. So I can define my layout here. In grid layouts, the layouts are bootstrap based, so it is 12 column based. So my layout is 12 columns. And then in my layout, I can specify row configurations. I've got some row configurations here. They can be added into your layouts. And rows can be divided into cells, again, 12 column based. So in each row, I can specify what is called a grid editor. And these are the options that I have here, and I've allowed only Doctype. So there are two ways to create the grid editors. A couple of options ships with Umbraco, and that is specified in the grid editors config. And as you can see, it's all pretty basic. There's rich text editor, image, and headlines. So it's pretty basic. If you want anything complex more than this, you probably need to handcraft Angular views and controllers, and even have a good knowledge about the API, back office API in itself, so that you can give a consistent editorial interface to your editors. And if you don't want to go into the trouble of doing that, what you can do is use Doctype grid editors. So with Doctype grid editors, you don't need to create Angular views or controllers. You use element types to insert content into your grid. So again, this is installed as a NuGet package, and the configuration starts here in the package manifest. So this is installed with the NuGet package that you install for the Doctype grid editor. You define your element types in Umbraco, and we'll go through the main configuration options here. So we have the name and the alias that you describe here, and this is shown in your row configuration. And I can specify my allowed element types or doc types. So I have 3 element types: hero, configuration steps, and element ports. So I have allowed those as my doc types. And these element types will be available for me to insert content into my grid cells. So let's have a look at how that's done. So I have, again, even with Doctype grid editor, the starting point is the grid layout itself, the data type with grid layout. You are actually extending that data type to use Doctype grid editor. So if I click a row configuration here, it gives me the Doctype option, which I showed you now in the package manifest. And if I head over to my content, what I get is the option to choose Doctype, and then I can choose which element type to insert content using. And as you can see here, in this particular row configuration, all the element types that I suggested or I have is allowed. If you don't want to do it, if you want to have specific element types tied up to specific row configurations, what you can do is you can split it up into one element type per config options like so, and choose those specific ones for your row configuration. So that's the grid editor layout and how it looks like in the back office. Grid editor allows you to have previews. I haven't turned on the previews here, but you can turn on previews, and that's done by enabling the preview by a true flag. And then you can specify your preview paths here along with the controller and a CSS file if needed. And the website rendering partials are available in this path for you. Again, these are all configurable and changeable. Feel free to have a look at my GitHub repo on how it is rendered in the website. The next option we can look at is the nested content. So nested content was introduced in V7 again as a package from the Umco umbrella. That is Lee and Matt were the package owners. And nested content made its way into the core with version 7.7. And when V8 came out, the grid layout, that is the native grid layout, or nested content was the option to create block-based content. And this again starts with element type and a data type configuration. And that is my nested content data type. It's based on a property editor called nested content. And then you can choose your element types here. Only element types are available for you to create nested content. So that's one of the things that you need to remember. And you can make it extra friendly by adding any name template. So this shows up in the back office for you, for your editors. And that is how nested content looks like in the back office. There is no preview for nested content, so that's one of the downsides. But what you have is the ability to copy widgets. So I can copy all of this content and paste it into another page of nested content document type. I can copy single items if needed. So it's pretty flexible. And I have created websites using nested content for block building, and it works as long as you don't want a preview. The next one from HQ is the block list editor. This is the newest one, newest option that we have in Umbraco. It was introduced in 8.7, and it looks like the future of block lists in Umbraco core. If you want to know more about block lists in particular, attend Jason and Mark's talk today, later on today, because they'll be having a full-on talk about block lists alone. But let's have a configuration, look at the configuration of the block list again, which again starts with the element types. And those element types can be defined as blocks in my data type based on the block list editor. So these are my element types. And the data type itself is quite handy because I can create a new element type from here, which if needed, that's quite handy. And let's talk about the data type configuration before we move on to the block configuration, because there's a fair amount of configuration available for the blocks itself. With block list, the default editing mode looks like this. That is with an overlay which comes in. You can choose your block from here. This is called the block catalog. You can choose your block from here, say like this, and then editing happens in this overlay. So this is the default editing mode in block list. And there is an extra addition on top of this called the live editing mode. When I turn on this live editing mode, what happens is the content that I type in here in this overlay, as and when you type it in, it becomes available for me in here. So I can see the change happening quite quickly. And if I turn on the inline editing mode, what happens is we don't have this overlay at all for editing. Content editing becomes inline. That is much more like nested content. You edit content within the main area itself of the CMS. And talking more about the block configuration, there's a fair amount of config available on a per block level. Again, you can have a name template. As you can see, I have a bit of a preview here. It's not very visual, but I just wanted to prove a point with it. We can specify a custom view, which is again Angular-based view. And I can also define a custom CSS if needed. And what happens is the blocks that you see here, the previews that you see here runs within a scoped mode, which means the back office UI is not available in this section for you. So you can have totally different looking previews and not worry about the website rendering at all when you play around with the previews. Moving on, we have a data model. So we have two models for the block list. What you get is a content model, which is normally the element type itself behind the scenes. That is the content aspect of it. And with block list, there is the ability to have settings separated from the content part. So for me, it looks like the editor gets a feeling that they're getting a bit more control over the content than just editing content. So I can specify a document type and attach that as the settings for the block list. I can specify a thumbnail for the catalog appearance, and that thumbnail is what gets shown here, as well as in the block catalog. And it's one of my favorite features in block list because, again, it's very visual to the content editors. If you don't want to go with the thumbnail, you can choose the background color and icon, and all that it does is it shows the background color and the colored icon for the element type here. But go visual if you can, because it gives that extra edge to the editors. And having a look at the block list itself, we again have the ability to copy the blocks. We have a preview. And if I select on one of the options, I have the content. I don't have a settings here because I haven't configured a settings tab. But where I do have the settings, I can see a little cogwheel icon and I can go into the settings as well. So it's quite a nice feature that settings is separate from the content aspect of it. So moving on, we are getting into the packages world again. The first one I want to talk about is the containment content blocks. So containment for Umbraco is a huge package which Lee authored, and it contains a lot of property editors and components which he used to use for his Umbraco implementations, and he made it available to the community. High fire to Lee on that. And we have a property editor called content blocks, which can be used to create block content in Umbraco. So again, we'll start with the data type. The element types are again the basis for this, and the element types are specified as the blocks. The property editor is called containment content blocks, and there are two display modes for containment content blocks. This is the display mode inside the CMS itself. The default mode is called the stack, and in stack mode, we have a preview, and it looks like a stack of content, like so. And if you don't want the stack option, you have a list option. And the way it looks like is it doesn't have a preview A to begin with. And it looks like how multi-node tray picker or the content picker in Umbraco is displayed in the back office. And one of the key features is the developer mode. And if I turn on the developer mode, it helps me edit the raw JSON data behind the scenes. So that is containment content blocks. If I go and have a look at the containment content blocks, I can edit the raw JSON value like so. Just like nested content has the ability to copy all blocks, we have that in content blocks. I can copy here as well. And the fun fact about containment content blocks is that I can copy the content block here and use it in a nested content page and vice versa. There is a preview available as well. I can create custom previews, but it doesn't run in a scoped mode. So you might have to play around with the preview a bit to get that working. But I found containment content blocks incredibly easy to get started with, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. So feel free to have a look at it. The next one is Plex content blocks. And the first thing when I talk about this is that comes to my mind is the fantastic UI it benefits from. And I think this is one of those things which has had its silent demo over the couple of years. And this is the UI I was talking about. This caught my eye at the very first sight, a fantastic preview. And it doesn't only show me the desktop preview, it shows me the mobile preview as well. And the fun fact is that this is all hooked up into the preview functionality in Umbraco itself. So we don't have to create custom previews as developers. And the configuration of this is a mixture of both Umbraco configuration as well as code. So again, we start off with the element types. And based on each element type you have, you need to create a nested content data type with maximum and minimum items set to 1. This is quite important. And as you can see, it is 1 element type per data type, which is a nested content data type. And you also need to create a Plex content blocks based data type. And this data type is added to your document type. So what you see here, this data type is of Plex content blocks, or this is the data type I have used. Once you have your nested content type set up, you need to get hold of this ID, and this ID needs to go into your code, into your component, and register using a composer, because that is how it ties up everything together. So let's have a look at the code for that. So the way Plex content blocks works is you create your nested content data type, and that is defined as a content block definition. So it's a customization, so it needs a component in Umbraco. I inject a content block definition repository. And in my initialize method, I define a content block definition. And each block definition has a name and an ID. This ID needs to be unique, and you need to create your own ID. The data type key, which I got hold of from my back office, goes in here. You can have a preview image, which is going to be used inside the back office, and it's available to the editors. Another thing which stands out for Plex content blocks is the layouts. So with Plex content blocks, settings take the shape of layouts. And for every block that you have, you can define multiple layouts. So if you have a hero block with text left, text center, and text right, there can be 3 different layouts. So settings kind of take the shape of layouts for that. And each layout, again, has an ID, name, description. You can have a preview image again, which is going to be super useful to the editors. I'll show that in a bit. And the view path is where you suggest the website rendering view. So this is all going into my component, and I need to register that using a composer. And the system will pick it up for me when the code runs. So back in the back office, if I go into add content, it gives me a nice UI to pick my blocks from. So if I select a block, I can pick a layout. Again, this is all coming from the layout preview that I added. And this image comes in from the content block definition preview that I added as well. Another feature which I want to highlight is the ability to hide a particular content block. This kind of, I think this is a functionality available only to the Plex content blocks. I can copy content block content and use it in other pages which has the same data type as well. So I cannot copy between the data types, but yes, if it is another page which uses Perplex content blocks, it will work. And I can choose, if I have a layout selected, in my case, it's layout 2, I can change to layout 1 directly from here, and the website will refresh it for me when I save and publish the page. So that is Perplex content blocks. And the last one is Bento Editor. So Bento Editor is more of a layout builder for me. So you can create complex layouts in a page. So I saved it to last. And Bento has 2 different parts. One is a Bento library, which is the reusable content. So you can have snippets of content stored in your content tree itself, and you can reuse that in your pages. Or you can have items which can be inserted directly into the page, and that's called a single-use item. Again, Bento makes use of element types for this, but there's a bit of extra configuration that's done that needs to be done in the back office, which is an element type that you need to define. It can be of any name. It doesn't need to have any properties. And I have named it Bento item composition. And what we need to do as developers is when I set up the data type using the Bento stack, I need to pick the composition that I just showed you as the item doctype composition content type. So this particular composition, which I specify here, is the gel to the entire Bento system. And this composition must be specified on all the element types which I plan to use as my as the element types for the Bento editor, or the ones which are supposed to go on the Bento editor page. So if I have an element type with this composition, then Bento will pick it up for me. From here on, I can define layouts. Layouts need to have layout name and an alias. The layouts in Bento Editor are CSS based, CSS grid based, but on the front end rendering, you can use any of it, any framework like Tailwind or Bootstrap, or even your own handcrafted responsive library if you need. So in my layout, I'm specifying a layout of 1FR, which means it spans the entire width of the page. If I want 2 columns, then I can specify 1 and 2. So the second one will be double the size of the first one. And layouts for me in this case are more like rows of the page rather than the page itself. And for each layout, you can have areas. And in my case, I have defined a single area, and it has a single column, and it has a single row as well. And in my area, I get the option to select my single use items, which are specified here, and the reusable library items. With Bento, it is not necessary to have the reusable library. You can choose to not use it if you want, but you need to have that composition, and that composition needs to go on all element types. And that is a must thing to do when it comes to Bento, because that is the factor which gels everything together in Bento. So I have set up both reusable library and single-use item. And to set up the reusable library, what we need to do is create document types. Again, they can be of any name. In my case, Bento library is the root of the Bento library. So that's where all my content goes in. And then I have my Bento item type folder. And this item type folder contains the reusable content for each types. So I have again got 3 types like hero, configuration, and pods. So when I create reusable content, the content belonging to each type goes into one folder, which is of the type Bento item folder. So again, these needs to be kind of hooked up in my Bento stack data type. In the library folder content type, I specify that this is my Bento library document type. And here I say, this is my Bento item type folder. And that's how it again works everything out from there on. And if I have library items specified in my setup, what it gives me the option is when I try to insert a layout, it gives me the option to do the content. It also gives me the ability to create a new library item or use from the library item. So if I create a new library item here, it directly inserts it into the page, and it also goes and adds it to the Bento library in a folder corresponding to that particular type. Or I can use from the library, in which case I can pick something from the library, or I can insert content here. And it is much like inserting a normal content in any other type using an overlay. So that's Bento Editor for you. Again, it's a page builder. Let's quickly have a look at the comparison and some of the features. The setup, grid, block list, and nested content is out of the box. The rest are packages, but all of them are NuGet packages. And all of what I showed you today is all open source. So feel free to go and contribute. Can be code contributions, documentation, maybe code snippet. If you have a feature request, try to raise that. If you spot a bug, try to raise that and try and help out and see if you can fix that as well for them. And all these packages are supported over various versions of Umbraco. So be careful and make sure that you make choices based on your Umbraco version. Configuration effort for me, the most effort is needed on grid because I have to handcraft all my views and controllers. The rest are okay till about content blocks. The only place where you could probably hit a little bit of a snag is block list if you want to have really custom previews with, again, hooking up to AngularJS controllers. Plex content blocks in Bento, I think there's a fair bit of reading up to do. And once you get around the principles and the idea and thought process behind it, it becomes a smooth ride from there on. Grid, there is no models builder support, but all the other packages, all the other options have models builder support. You can get strongly typed views. If you want strongly typed views with grid, you need to rely on to something like Skybird grid data, but that's nowhere near models builder support. And if you are someone who would like to have business logic in controllers, grid cannot do that for you. DTG can. With block list, it's not available out of the box, but Soren has, again, got a package called block list MVC, which helps you do that. With nested content, you can create something to have your business logic in controllers again. With Plex content blocks, you can. I did not find anything relevant in the documentation for content blocks or Bento. I didn't get the time to go into the package itself and have a look at the source code. So I think it is a no. You cannot have business logic in controllers. All the data is stored as JSON, and you have the option to update programmatically as well. And moving on to some of the editorial features, Grid and Bento are more like layout builders for me. You can create complex layouts. So is DTGE. But block lists, nested content, containment content blocks in Plex content blocks, it's more about page. You can create multiple, you can create pages with fluid components, but you cannot do anything on the layout level. With regards to settings, Grid and DTG helps you store settings on a per row basis that can be configured from the data type. With block list, the settings is encapsulated into separate Doctype. With nested content and containment content blocks, it needs to be part of the element type itself. And with Plex content blocks, it takes the shape of